that this debate is fundamentally a disagreement about what the minimum standard of provision from the government should be. That is where the clash lies. What we've told you that the minimum is far, far lower than what they wanted to point out. We've told you the government's role is always to provide and facilitate the environment in which individuals can self-actualise, in which individuals can lead their own lives and do what they like. The government should stop you from falling below a certain level, give you a basic education and help to function, but not provide you with everything you need. The government, for example, doesn't have an obligation to provide you with a job. They do have the obligation to provide you with the tools to get a job and put you in that position, but not to give you a job. We say the same sort of thing applies for home ownership. I'm going to look at home ownership, and again, more widely than the role of government. Secondly, in terms of capitalism, and finally, in terms of this sort of stakeholder argument we heard from the Deputy Prime Minister. So firstly, in terms of home ownership, what we would say is fundamentally, at the moment, we think many individuals are able to exercise their autonomy quite well without owning their own home. They have the ability to rent. But even more than that, ladies and gentlemen, at the moment, most individuals who buy a house are beholden to their bank, ladies and gentlemen. They have a mortgage. We think they can handle it just fine. In terms of getting respect and respect as an individual, what we would say, quite frankly, is there are other ways to do that. But even more than that, the government's role is not to give you that respect. You've got to go out and earn it for yourself, ladies and gentlemen. And I think that many people have the capability to do that. But moreover, ladies and gentlemen, actually, what we'd say is in terms of the kind of burst incentives, because they want to bag us about talking practicalities. At some point, you just have to consider how the hell is this going to work in the real world. They wanted to get up here and tell us people are going to take the public housing. Why would you take public housing if you know the government will give you a house, will give you the money to buy a house if you refuse? We think that there are huge financial costs. What's the effect of that? That means that all the effects, I'll take you in a moment, sir, that Victor spoke about inflating prices, come through. Because everyone gets capital for a house. Everyone gets the money to buy a new house, and that has a huge effect in pushing up prices. Sir?
Our policy was that we would build public buildings which you may own parts of, right? And if you don't get these things and you say no, we will give you the equivalent sum to buy a similar house elsewhere.
Yes, why would you buy a government house? Why would you take a government house if you could buy your own one? Like, it's still going to inflate prices. All your arguments, all your stuff about being beholden to someone means that if any individuals take public housing, they're beholden to the state, to the government. They don't have their own kind of autonomy. Under your logic, they'll all take the money and go buy houses, ladies and gentlemen. Even if they don't all do it, we still think a substantial amount of people will do it. What's the harm of that? We'd say, firstly, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, you create greater cycles and you just put these people in worse position. We don't think that you actually eliminate subprime mortgages, ladies and gentlemen, because you just inflated prices. You need to either keep pushing more and more money in, or you still put these people in positions where they can't afford loans. Why? The people we're probably talking about are people who are lacking educated, ladies and gentlemen. They don't have job skills and sort of a high level of education, which means they are the most financially vulnerable in society. And this is exactly what Victor told you, ladies and gentlemen, that when you inflate prices like this, you only further the kind of signals to go out and buy a house, because we just don't think that you have the capability to do that. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, on this kind of stakeholder analysis, what we heard is the idea these individuals need to buy a house to be stakeholders. We have several things with that. Firstly, we say that a lot of people actually enjoy moving from community to community, going from different place to place. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, we say if people do want to settle down, they have the capability to do so in a renting situation as well. Like, think about it from a landlord's perspective. Landlords fundamentally want a stable income over a long term. If you say, I want to sign a 5-year lease with you, I want to stay in this kind of community, we think most landlords would jump at that kind of opportunity. So we think there are great opportunities currently to build those kind of routes that they want. We just don't think you need this kind of policy to do that. There are far easier and far cheaper ways to build social capital, ladies and gentlemen, that you wanted to talk about. I'm going to look at two arguments. Firstly, why this worsens inflationary cycles of boom and bust, and why that's ultimately bad for homeowners. And certainly we think that even if this policy doesn't cover everyone, there'll still be people we think who will have mortgages. And secondly, why this actually reduces the individual's autonomy. So,
Point of
what,
information.
go ahead.
Explain to me how the wretched in a homeless shelter can seize self-respect for themselves when they have no assets of their own.
Okay, cool. The way they don't do that, the way that you get them to have self-respect for themselves is not by giving them a house, but giving them emergency shelter, ladies and gentlemen. It's providing with the services, providing with the education in the first place, ladies and gentlemen, and outreach services. You can't do that when you're giving everyone hundreds of thousands of pounds or euros or dollars or whatever it is to go and buy a house, ladies and gentlemen. You reduce the political and economic capital to do those sorts of things. Like at some point, you just have to look at the real world. So, why is this worse than cycles? Firstly, raises speculative investments. What does that mean? Basically, when people see that prices are rising, we think they will rise, as Victor told you, about the fact that when people are starting to have this extra money to go out and buy, this pushes prices up. What does that mean? You see more speculative investment, people getting into the housing market simply because they think they can turn a quick buck. What's the problem with that? So the problems with that are, it worsens this kind of inflationary cycle. It keeps pushing prices up more and more. Where have we seen that? The United States, the United Kingdom, ladies and gentlemen, in Australia. All the first world countries that have had huge housing booms have seen partly through speculative investment. What's the problem with this? The problem is that when you make these kind of market cycles bigger on the upside, the crash on the downside is worse. When the downside hit comes, it is much, much worse. We're seeing that right now in the housing market. We think this is going to exacerbate that because it's going to continue to push up that upside. It means they're going to have problems like negative equity, which we're seeing right now, where your house is actually worth less than your loan, ladies and gentlemen. What we'd say is that either one of two things is going to happen. Either their policy will cover every single person, ladies and gentlemen, which you don't think is mind-bogglingly impractical, or there are still going to be some people who will choose to exercise their own autonomy, buy houses and still have mortgages, and when the bust comes, they're going to be hurt. So either way, we think there are problems. Finally, why this reduces individual autonomy. We think, quite frankly, you need to have incentives to go out there and do your own thing and be, and maximise your own autonomy. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, public housing is so crappy. Like, it's not very good. Partly there to make sure that people have motivation and incentives to go out and, self-actualise and actually go out and get the skill. We think that that's why governments only provide the bare minimum necessary, so as not to create these kind of perverse incentives. We think that your policy, whilst it may try to target the homeless, actually targets everyone, ladies and gentlemen, and reduces incentives for everyone. If you want to help the homeless, if you want to help the very bottom of society, this is not the way to do it. It reduces political and economic capital to do so, but moreover, we can get a whole host of problems in terms of inflationary effects and reducing individual autonomy. We proudly beg to oppose.